You are listening to the Final Say Radio Show, a Rappaport Media production, with your host Brett Rappaport and co-host John Rappaport.
Well, Congressman Phil Rowe, I'm so glad that you're joining us. And, I got to say, John and I have been in Israel, and we actually spent a day traveling in Jordan as well, which was very interesting. And but we experienced so many different things, and because the trip we went on was as much based on security as it was in just experiencing Israel, we came to see some things very close up. And if I could share just a couple quick ones, Congressman, we were so close to Syria that we could hear the shelling, and we didn't know who was shelling who, but you could hear it and you could really feel it, and that's a scary proposition.
Brett, were you on the Golan at the time, or?
We were, first of all, we were up along the Lebanese border in a couple spots, and yes, we were in the Golan Heights, and then we were a little past the Golan Heights. So I guess it's still part of the Golan Heights, but the backside.
Okay, I've been there too, and it is scary.
And just a couple thoughts here before we get into all the other stuff. But just for those who, just to paint this picture, when you stand and we were in the mountain range along Lebanon, we were in the Golan Heights, and we were in different parts of the West Bank. And the commonality is that before Israel reobtained or possessed these territories, the enemy did. And I call them the enemy because they were the ones that were constantly harassing and launching rockets or committing attacks against not just Israeli people, but whoever happened to be there. And when you're on top of the mountain looking down at those who you're threatening, you have a superior position. And when you actually stand on this land and look around, you realize how strategically important it is. And for anyone to ever try to force Israel's hand to return it, they're just completely wrong in that issue. So that's my thoughts.
Well, Brett, they asked us to have any closing comments, and I said, look, as an old 2nd Infantry Division guy years ago that I was in, never give up the high ground. And you pay too high a price for it. And there are places, and most people here, and you have to actually be there to understand, but to see how small that country is, and they're completely surrounded, and then on the other side, they've got the Mediterranean, so there's nowhere to go. So there are no friendly places there. And, I mean, literally, there are places where you can make a D- in artillery and hit Tel Aviv if you had the high ground. So you wouldn't have to be very good at all. And you can see it from these areas. And literally, there's an area that you can go from Jordan to the Mediterranean, in 10 minutes in a car, maybe 15. If you're slow, you get caught by a light. I mean, it's not very far.
Yeah, no, not at all. In fact, we Danny Dayan had met us in the up near the West Bank, and we were standing on a hill having a discussion, and he points out there and he says, "That's Tel Aviv." And you're looking at the skyline of Tel Aviv, and you realize anybody with a shoulder-fired rocket launcher could hit Tel Aviv if they wanted to. I mean, I'm assuming they could probably hit that far. And it
like
is
I said,
scary.
a D-. It's not. You don't have to be very good at it to do it. It's so close. And and again, in the southern part, people don't appreciate. One of the things that people do not appreciate here is that they in near Gaza, the Gaza Strip, mothers with their children have to be sure that they're very close to those children because they've got literally seconds when the sirens go off and those missiles are fired. And they're not very accurate, but look, they hit things. And to get their children in a safe place. And there are, as you know, you've seen them, where you wait for a bus. There are concrete enclosements you can get in to protect yourself in case a rocket attack occurs. We don't think about that here.
Yes. And just a few more things while we're on this. We stayed at some friends towards the end of the trip. We stayed a few extra days, and we were with actually family in Jerusalem, and we stayed in their house, and they showed us their safe room, which is basically all the houses are made out of stone, and they decorate them nicely with the Jerusalem stone, but all the windows have gates on them or some sort of protection. They all have slide down like metal that protects the glass. And a safe room is essentially a concrete room where you have a window and a door that completely seal. So in the case or an event of a chemical attack or something of that nature, people could, for the time it would take for the gas to dissipate, get into a safe room and survive it. And this is something that we're not accustomed to in this nation. I know we used to hide under our desk from the threat of nuclear bombs, which is funny in itself, but this is something that we just don't really experience here in the United States.
No, we do not. I mean, you bring that up. When I was an elementary school kid, we used to get under our desks, and Fort Campbell, Kentucky was right next door, probably 5 or 6 miles from my school, where they had, I don't know how many nuclear weapons stored there. I didn't even know it. We wouldn't have had a desk in milliseconds if there had been a nuclear war. So, but we didn't know the difference then when I was a little kid.
No, that's right. So we have two very important things that we're discussing important things, but domestically we have a few important things to discuss today. And obviously there was a deal that was reached, and I'm not too happy with what happened. I know you're not. But if you could give us a little insight, if you will, as to what happened at the end there that it seemed to me the last day or two we weren't going to have a deal, and then all of a sudden something starts happening in the Senate. Then they reach this deal, and it comes to the House, and I'm not sure the House had too much of a choice but to just go along with it at that point. But if you can give us some insight as to what really happened there, that would be great.
I can. I think, Brett, we need to go back and take a long view, and the long view is, why are you doing any of this? Why does any of this matter, and why does shutdowns matter and all that? And look, I've only been there 5 years, but I realize that just looking and bringing the experience I've had as a doctor running an office and then being a mayor of a city for several years before I came to Congress, that debt does make a difference about how you operate. And we have $17 trillion in debt right now. It's unbelievable. And if interest rates were like they were a few years ago, even 5 or 6% would be by far the biggest line item in our budget would be interest on the national debt. And in 1970, only 5% of our debt was held by foreigners. Today, 47% is held by foreigners, and those bondholders want to be paid. And I understand that. We borrowed the money, we should pay it back. I got that. Well, we used the debt ceiling vote in August of 2011 to negotiate $1 worth of cuts in federal spending for every dollar we raised the debt ceiling. And debt ceilings have been used for a long time, and we were actually in a disadvantage because we were debating two separate things. I think people got that confused. One was a continuing resolution. You heard the word clean, CR, and all that. The average person now has begun to think that that's how you budget in this country. That's not how we budgeted for over 220 years. The way you've done that is you've had two parts of our budget, which is the mandatory spending. That's already current law. That's Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, interest on the national debt. There's no ceiling to that. 10,000 people today became 65 years of age. They became eligible for Medicare, and we're obligated to pay for that. The discretionary part, that's the part that we discuss every year, and those bills are passed through 12 committees. And the Appropriations Committee appropriates the money for operating, let's say, the Department of Defense or the VA or whatever. Those bills are debated and voted on, discussed in the committee. They then come to the House floor. They can be amended on the House floor. They can be debated again on the House floor and voted on. They're then sent to the Senate. What typically happens, look, the Senate's in Democratic hands, the House in Republican hands. The Senate can do what it does. It can bring up, change, amend, do whatever they want to. If the two don't agree, they go back to a committee, a conference committee. They hammer out the differences. We re-vote, send it to the president, and he signs it or vetoes it. That's the way our system works. It's supposed to work. The way it is working, and the way so much of this was just utter nonsense in the last couple of weeks, was we had passed 4 appropriations bills. One of them, and I remember the vote, and I may have it one vote out, is the VA military construction bill, and I happen to remember that because I'm on the Veterans Affairs Committee. We passed that bill out of the House of Representatives 421-4, Brett. It was almost unanimous. Where is that bill now? It's on Harry Reid's desk. So all this nonsense that occurred with and people now think a continuing resolution is how you run the government. No, it's through an appropriations process. That's how you do it. And the reason that's important is when you have less money to spend, you want to spend it. There may be some programs that need more money. There may be some that need less. But a continuing resolution, you just do the same bad policies. You just keep doing them. And that's why we have to stop that. And I feel like that debt is a huge problem. And the reason the debate on the The Budget Control Act of 2011 is so important is it worked. And for the first time in 60 years, spending was less 2 years in a row. This year, through the first 11 months of the fiscal year, through August, Brett, we had spent $127 billion less than we spent the year before. That's remarkable when you think about it, since it's been 60 years and however many presidents since then that it hasn't happened. And we missed a huge opportunity in being able to push forward with that goal of balancing the budget. And all you have to do, and this is something that we should explain day after day, all you have to do to balance the budget within 7 to 8 years, and I talked to Paul Ryan before we left, who's the chairman of our budget committee, will be part of the negotiation process with the Senate committee, is to hold the growth, not cut spending, but to hold the growth of federal spending to 3% per year for the next 7 years, and you will balance the budget. Now, if you or I thought we were going to get a 3% increase in our salary every year for the next 7 years, we'd be doing cartwheels. And that's all we have to do in this country, and we just missed the chance to do it. And I just decided, look, I understand about default. I understand about passing the budget and shutdowns. I got that. But sooner or later, some people have got to stand up and say enough is enough. We cannot continue these current policies and survive as a nation we all know.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but all this talk about default, I mean, you only default if you choose not to make the payments. And that would mean that the president or somebody would decide, instead of making the debt payments, that will pay for food stamps or something else, which really is discretionary. Because I think that if you have enough to meet your Social Security obligations, your Medicare, Medicaid obligations, the things that you really have to pay plus your debt payments, everything else really truly is discretionary. And I actually, all the language that I've heard, and I was trying to pay attention, of course, reading the Israeli papers and what I could when I can get internet and whatnot. But I thought the language and the vitriol was really above and beyond this time.
Brett, it was, and what you said is correct. I mean, and I said this on many national television shows that I was on the last couple of weeks, was that, look, if we default on the debt, it won't be one person's responsibility, and that's President Obama, because we take in almost $250 billion a month, and we pay out $20 billion or so in interest payments. So if he chooses not to pay it, that's his call, but the money is there in the bank to do it with. And I think what we also didn't do, and this is some inside the Beltway stuff, what we tried to do is to take away the Secretary of Treasury's extraordinary measures ability, and let me tell you why. Because what we just did by removing the debt ceiling to the 7th of February, it's not going to be the 7th of February. It'll be March or April or May before we hit the debt ceiling. He's allowed to decide how he pays the bills. Exactly what the president said we were not going to do, because we'd default yesterday if we hadn't passed this, which was nonsense. We were never going to default on our obligations unless he chose to.
Right. And to your point, I'm looking at an article by Stephen Denon in the Washington Times actually discussing that very issue. It says the debt jumped today, $328 billion, because it was enacted. It just borrowed all this money, and so all the shell game that has transpired for the last few months, as we're all watching the numbers, saying, how come it hasn't changed the dollar at all for months now? And then all of a sudden, bing, there you go, $328 billion. So you're right. So now they've refunded their extraordinary measures. They've replenished whatever they could do there, and so they could do this game all over again. And to me, this is how you sum it up, Congressman. It's called kicking the can down the road, so your future generations and even the current generations will have to pay a heftier price at some point. And when it compounds great enough, it's really going to hurt.
You pay for it in a lower standard of living for future generations. That's what you pay for it in. And I didn't get elected to leave my family. That would be, and Brett, I guess I look at it like a father and a grandfather. When you get married and have kids, you want to make sure that you get your kids raised and educated and off on their own. And then hopefully you've got enough to take care of yourself so that you're not a burden to anyone. That's what you try to do in your life as a father. And that's exactly the way I look at our country, is that I want to make sure that I do my part for America, and then I want to make sure I do my part by not leaving my kids an obligation that I created. And I think that's what a lot of us feel like, and it's time to do that. And the sooner you do it, Brett, you're absolutely right, the less the pain is. It will be a little teeny bit of pain now. For look at what's going on in Greece or Spain when there's 26 or 7% unemployment. Look, for teenagers and young people in Greece, it's 60%. 60% for young adults is unemployment rate. Can't find anything to do.
It's incredible. So I can't let you go without having a small discussion on healthcare. So, and I know what it's amazing to me. I mean, I guess it's predictable, but watching all the stories, and it seems to be worse than we imagine. But problems from just not that many people being able to figure out how to sign up or register for the new healthcare rollout, and also they've had a lot of problems with the software. They have difficulties with the implementation on various levels, people not being properly, not understanding what they're supposed to do, not understanding what they're entitled to. And so we have this major problem, and I think the argument for, it seems, several months now has been, listen, if you're going to grant amnesty, if you will, to corporations and to this group and to that group, then what about the individual? I mean, we the people, so why not allow everyone the same time period and then figure out how to actually set this up if that's what you're going to do? And obviously the administration didn't want to do this, but it's really a laughingstock, and I think it really hits home when you see Democrats and former members of even the administration coming out publicly and making statements. This thing's a disaster.
Well, they're being kind to it. And we spent $624 million of the taxpayers' money to set up something that not only doesn't work. I have to buy my insurance through the exchange now, and I can't get on. I feel like the woman's picture that's on the healthcare.gov is in my family now. I've seen her so many times, and I can't sign in. So if I can't, with the skills I have, think about someone who doesn't have computer skills or whatever, how they are. And Brett, we said this. I have said this, and I would like to take you out to a steak dinner in Washington when you come the next time if I'm wrong on this. They're going to delay the individual mandate. All we ask on the continuing resolution, which I don't like continuing resolutions, but it was the first one I'll have to say I hadn't voted for, and it was the first debt ceiling since we've been a majority I haven't voted for, and I didn't for the reasons I talked about a minute ago. But the reason we asked the president, look, if you point out, if you're going to treat corporations this way, just treat the average citizen the same way and wait till it gets up and can work. He's going to do that in some way before this is all over, because you cannot fine people, tax people, penalize people, whatever you want to, John Roberts, the Chief Justice, wants to call it, for something they can't buy. If you can't get on the web and buy it, how can you fine somebody for not doing that? And that's exactly what they're going to do. And remember the argument, you may have heard it, it's the law of the land. We can't change the law of the land. Well, I wish those same people would leave my Second Amendment rights alone. They keep trying to change that.
That's a good point. You know, I had this thought. I was discussing a couple things yesterday, and one was that Justice Roberts, with his decision, whether we agree with it or not, and my case, I don't. I think he was wrong. But his decision set up a course that Congress could handle this by simply repealing not the health care bill, but the taxes, because it essentially, you change the tax code, you defund it in that manner, and then it falls apart on its own if it won't anyway. But I was thinking that what if a group of Republicans, GOP, reached out to the president and said, listen, we want to remove the tax. We don't want taxes having to deal with Obamacare, but we're willing to concede with you on, you want to make the upper 1-2% pay their fair share. We're willing to give you the 1 or 2% raise. And so you're swapping one tax for another. But I think in a sense you're kind of forcing the president's hand as to something that he was once calling for that he didn't necessarily get. But now he's saying, well, you wanted it here because this is one thing that we want. This is something you wanted. And I think just kind of changing the discussion, if you will, because I just feel like somehow the Republican Party has to address tax issues or some of the economic issues and take the discussion off of some of the things that we're not winning. The the war of the words, if you will, on. And also, I'm afraid that he's going to take up immigration and some of these other things that I could just imagine the future of the country if we see another radical, massive piece of legislation thrown at us.
Well, I agree with your tax issues, and the problem with it is that you've got the idea of the device tax, and most people know it's a 2.3% gross receipts tax on medical devices. And most medical device companies are small companies. Many of them are startups. Come with an idea, they get a little capital, develop an idea, and so they're not big, huge companies. A few of them are, but look, we all know those are just passed on to us as higher costs. You know that. I mean, somebody has to pay. And the problem with this tax bill they put through is it only affects the high income, the above $250,000 a year, and the rest of them are stealth taxes that people are paying. They just don't see them. And, they don't see the device tax. They don't see the tax on insurance companies. Well, guess what they do? They just pass it along as a $4 a month increase in your premium. That's all. You just think, well, my premium went up. Well, why did it go up? It went up because of the extra taxes. That's why. So these are stealth taxes.
Yes. At some point, even as the younger generation has to sign up for health insurance that they might not have ordinarily needed or paid for, they're now going to be forced into signing up for something. They're going to have to pay for it, and eventually they're going to figure out who set this up, who established it. And I think there's going to be a blowback, and because they're not going to be happy, having to pay out, even if it's just $5,000 or $6,000 a year for a minimal policy. That's $5,000 or $6,000 a year that someone who's 20 or 22, 23 years old doesn't have. They have a hard enough time making their car payment. And I think at the end of the day, I think the average American is going to understand that this is really being forced into products we didn't want to buy. It hasn't corrected any of the problems we've had in our insurance and healthcare system, but by the way.
Well, and I'll tell you the other thing that Brett, that's happening too, that people are beginning to see in their communities, is that senior physicians are looking for the exit signs. And
yes.
We're having a mass exodus including my own doctor who just retired for that reason. And I mean, that's flatly why he did it. He just had enough. He said, I can't put up with this any longer. So he quit. He'd been at it for years here. One of the most respected physicians in my community, and he's no longer practicing. You'll see this over and over with the senior doctors. And so who's going to, number one, take care of all these folks? If you can even find anybody after you've got one of these very restricted policies. And I was on a radio show in New Hampshire the other day. They have one company that sells insurance on the exchange. You have one choice. So you guess what it's going to be? It's going to be an expensive choice is what it's going to be. And you're going to see this over in Tennessee. We have right now one choice, and we have a publicly funded, this is taxpayer dollars. The federal government allows these tax, let's say, non-for-profits to set up. They give them the money to get started. They're giving out free cell phones so they can, quotes, keep up with you as a patient. That's their come on. You know how many people they've signed up so far? 2. Well, that's pretty hard to have a very big risk pool with 2.
That's just amazing. If you can, if you have time for one last question.
Sure.
If I want to make sure I have this straight. When you look at the whole health care plan, it seems to me that what the federal government has done is they've transferred the responsibility for providing health care to a lot of union-type workers, government workers, pensioners, to shift them into Medicaid instead of Medicare or some of the other types of programs. And in doing so, it seems that the burden ultimately becomes a federal burden and not on the states or the municipalities that were having to pick up a lot of this. Am I correct on that?
Well, I think we won't know for 2 or 3 years if this thing stays in the law what everybody's going to do. This is the law of unintended consequences. And now you've heard me say it on your show many times before, is that I agree with the original premise of the Affordable Care Act. I just wish it had come to fruition, and that is we need to increase access for people. There are people out here that work every day that don't have access to affordable coverage. There's no question that's true. And number 2, lower the cost. But the second part has been a disaster. The cost, if you look at the cost of these plans, and as you pointed out, I had a young television reporter, a young woman yesterday, was doing a piece on the shutdown when I came home. And she said, Dr. Rose, she said, I've looked at what's going to happen to me, and she said, I can barely pay my cell phone bill and my car and my apartment, and now I'm going to have to pay this much more for health. And it's like 2 times what she was paying now, and she just doesn't have the money. And I don't know what she's going to do. And you're going to hear that story, as you pointed out a moment ago, over and over. People are going to make, to your question, businesses, governments, a lot of people are going to make decisions. Let me give you an example. Right here in my own community that I was mayor of, Johnson City, Tennessee, 65,000 people, the school system just decided to cut all, and we used to, through what I did, if you were a school bus driver here part-time, you picked up kids in the morning at 6:30 or 7, and by 9 o'clock you were done, you came back at 3, we provided you health insurance so we could get better drivers. We did that on our own. Nobody told us to do it. We did it because it was the right thing to do. But I just saw the school system of this county and 3 counties around it doing, cutting all of aides and everybody else to under 30 hours. They are turfing things out that used to be done in-house out so they don't have all that extra cost. They're already making those decisions right here in my own town because they had to survive.
Yeah, that's incredible. So I guess one more question. I lied. I'm sorry. I don't understand when we have these types of discussions between you and I in this program, why when I turn on any network and there's a discussion on any of these policies, why we can't have an open, honest discussion about the real problems and offer real solutions instead of constantly hearing the one side beating up the other side beating up the other, all the vitriol, all the name-calling, all the untruths, I guess, if you will, that are being thrown out there, instead of just allowing the American people to hear what's really going on and to make an educated decision on the choices that we really want to make and try to resolve some of them. And we don't,
Brett,
I don't see that.
I agree with you, and it's very difficult. What happens is that the parties get their. I don't read the talking points of my party. I don't even pick them up. And look, I live out here with 720,000 people that I represent in this district. I go out and talk to them and find out what's on their mind, and then go to Washington, D.C. and tell them what the people I represent. Examples like I just gave you here of the city, that's real. And when Kathleen Sebelius says that it's not, she is just flatly wrong, or she stayed inside the Beltway too long. These folks need to get outside the Beltway and find out what's going on out here in real America. And that's what representatives do. And I think that's one of the reasons you see a difference between the House and the Senate. And, I mean, I can't expect a senator. We've got 95 counties in the state of Tennessee. They can't spend as much time in these counties as I do. I understand that. They just physically can't do it. But that's my job, and that's the job of every representative. And, look, we should, especially on health care, Brett, this is the thing that bothers me so much. It should not be a partisan issue. It should be an issue about how do we provide, how do American citizens keep access to the best health care system in the world, and how do we expand it and improve it, not blow it up. And what is, and I'll get to really preaching in a minute, but it drives me crazy when I see all this money that insurance companies and the federal government doing, setting up these bureaucracies with clipboard carriers, I call them. I guess they're iPad carriers now, that provide no benefit for a patient that I ever saw. They just put hoops that the patient and the doctor have to jump through so they can get care. And what we need is a system to put doctors and patients and that patient's family back in charge of health care decisions like it used to be when the patient came in and just paid the doctor.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. And I don't know, I'm shaking my head because it just amazes me that we're, you know, you said you're in office for 5 years as a member of Congress, and I'm doing a show for 5 years, and you know, for 5 years you're watching a downward spiral into, how do you say this? Even when I was a kid watching the Jimmy Carter administration, and I saw Reagan and I saw Bush, Clinton. Every single president was able to sit down with the Congress and be able to work out, even if there weren't perfect solutions, but they were able to work together and get something accomplished. And we're not seeing right now I think you're right, you said it yourself. The House, I think, does a pretty good job of at least offering ideas, getting things passed, sending it on to the Senate. I don't think the Senate's doing anything positive at all, and I think the president is very one-minded and sticks to exactly the way he envisions it and isn't willing to bend at all. And I think it sets up a path that you really can't accomplish something. And when the media is not doing its job, we have exactly what happened yesterday, and that's a deal that doesn't do anything but really harm each and every American citizen going forward.
It does. I think, unfortunately, Brett, we have a president, and look, President Clinton and Newt Gingrich sat down, those two men hammered and yelled at each other, but they worked it out. And there's barely any communication between John Boehner and President Obama. There won't be until another crisis occurs. They won't speak to each other for months. And it's not because John Boehner refuses the phone calls. It's just that this president, and he doesn't talk to the Democratic Party either. He doesn't speak to them either. He doesn't deal with either one until something comes up like this. And he should have been building relationships over the past 5 years that you can sit down, as I've done. Look, I have people in the House on the other side of the party that are very liberal that I've worked on lots of issues with. And what we do is when we sit in the room, we don't talk about the things we don't agree on. We talk about the things we agree on. And we start working toward an agreement that we can get to a point and then move forward. And I've done several pieces of legislation with the other side exactly that way because we built up a trust and we've gotten to know each other over the last 5 years, and we know how you can make it work. This president doesn't do that. As soon as this is over, what's he out doing on the next day? Bashing the Republicans, not working toward building those bridges. That's what he's not doing.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I saw that coming. The second you guys had the deal signed, I knew today they're being nice and he's saying something nice because he had to give the speech. But I knew the next day all the talking heads would be out there, the people within the administration, even himself or Nancy or Harry Reid would be out there again. Well, it was the Tea Party, it was this group, it was the conservatives. Instead of just saying, you know what, we just have a problem because Washington's broken and we're not doing a good job of fixing it.
I'll give you a little behind-the-scenes, behind-the-curtain talk.
Sure.
And this was before anything happened. I was speaking to some unnamed senators, and they said that Reid would do a deal if the White House would let him. If you'll notice that Joe Biden, who was in on that Budget Control Act agreement that we had in 2011, I mean, it was like, is Joe on the moon? Where's the vice president?
I don't know.
He was. Yeah, I don't know where he was. I don't think anybody saw him. They
I haven't heard
his
name
6
in months.
feet deep. Yeah, they buried him 6 feet deep, and you never heard from him because I think this president is out to basically to destroy the Republican Party. I think that's the case, not to make the country better. And look, we're a country of a divided government, but we have to run the country, and not everybody gets what they want each time. Look, I get that, I understand that, and can work with that, and more than happy to. But you can't work if we're going to have where it doesn't matter if the House goes, Brad, and does all of its work on the appropriations process, hours and hours, hundreds of committee meetings, and then pass that on to the Senate and nothing happens. That's not the way a functioning government works. They are derelict in their duty to this country when you do that.
No, I agree with that, and in fact, I actually think that I understand what the president is, and I've come to grips with it, and I accept it, not what he's doing, but I accept what we have there. And I think it's really Congress's responsibility as a whole, both the House and the Senate, to meet their obligations and to ensure that the 1/3 of the government that's the responsibility of the Congress is being run completely by the Congress. And
yes, I agree with you.
A lot of it's being pushed onto the administration and saying, fine, you want it, you handle it, and it's not helping.
No, it's not healthy, and it's not the way our founding fathers designed it either.
No, not at all. And Congress, I know you spent a lot of time with us today, and I greatly appreciate it. I think we've discussed some probably as important things and have said quite a bit today that you certainly can't do on Fox in a 5-minute soundbite.
No.
So, again, I greatly appreciate it. I know our listeners do as well, and it's great to talk to you again, and we're happy to be back safely.
Well, if I was going to say, Brett, you and John both, thanks. I'm glad you guys are back safe, and we're glad to have you here, and thanks for having me on again.
No problem. And I have noticed you have been all over. I've seen quite a bit of your articles and interviews and things like that. So I'm glad that you're getting a chance to speak on not just healthcare, but some of the other important issues as well. So that's a great thing.
Well, thanks a lot. Have a great weekend.
Okay, you too. Excellent. Again, it's Congressman Phil Roe from the great state of Tennessee.